This is where we left off last time, and we were talking about the anger retaliation. We finished that up. I just wanted to kind of make sure we were at let you guys know where we were at. I should say a couple things I want to keep you aware of. Originally, I wasn't going to talk about power assertive rapists just because I want to make things a little bit simpler for you, but I will go ahead and include that in your lessons and lectures. I also made the appropriate changes in your PowerPoints if you happen to look at those, like where it says, you know, originally it said 3, but I've changed it back to 4 and added the anger retaliation rather than just going straight to sadistic. So that, excuse me, not anger retaliation, but I added the power assertive rapist. So that being said, let's go ahead and move on to that. I'm going to go ahead and show you all these particular um, characteristics all at once just because it's easier. So let's just go ahead and do that. So power assertive, basically, I shouldn't say all of them, but you're going to see half of them. So yeah, your power assertive type, it, some people will say it's similar to your uh, uh, anger, not anger retaliation, but we'll say that it's similar to anger retaliation. In some respects, yes. But when you really look at the motivating factors, no. Um, and I'll hopefully this will help explain that. So essentially, what I'm talking about with this is so power assertive, as it says here, express virility and dominance. So basically, these are the types of individuals who it's not that they hate women; they just see women as being lower than them. Uh, Basically, it's um, according to them, males should dominate females and not really have any regard for them. Not because they hate them, but just because in their thinking, men are just out and out superior to women. um, and he has and their idea of, like it says here, rapes because he feels entitled to do so. It's because the entitlement for this type of rapist comes simply because of what he feels like the role of man is supposed to be. He feels like because women, it's kind of like some cultures in the world that view women as basically second class, or not as uh, never being able to obtain the same status as a man. That's essentially what a power assertive rapist believes. Um, very very concerned with a macho mentality. Demonstrates that. On a side note, they tend to, if you're looking for profiling things, you're looking at different suspects. This type of person typically will end up driving, if they have a car, which they usually will, it's going to be a sports car or something along those lines, that when most people see it, maybe even a motorcycle, that when someone sees it, they think, oh, flashy and very masculine. Okay. That's kind of what we're talking about with power assertive rapists. Um, Here, another thing to keep in mind. So, similar to some of the other categories we talked about, this is not sex or raping someone is not simply for sexual gratification. Um, in fact, okay, you know how we said that for your excuse me, for your anger retaliation rapist, they wanted to express violence because of a hatred for women. Okay, in this case, it's, as you can read here, it's an act of predation, meaning uh, as a predator, I get to dominate my prey. So it's a chance to dominate someone else. That's all it really comes from. And that's why sometimes they may have an idea of what they want to do. They may have planned certain things out. So in a way, they are organized, but it's more so they have planned it, but not for a specific person. They have their idea, but it's not because, oh, I have a chance to have sex or do a sex act with this other person. It's more like here's an opportunity for me to demonstrate my dominance over this woman, for example. Power assertive rapist, unlike, you may have other categories, or other rapists that we have talked about, they typically choose female targets, but they can choose male targets. Power assertive rapist won't do that. Power assertive rapist will choose women. So there's that side of it. Like I said, no sexual enjoyment. It's just, also, they typically are in a relationship. So it's not uncommon for a power assertive rapist to be married or be in a dating relationship. Um, can't guarantee it's really a good relationship, because they already think that they are superior to any other female. Okay. So, but nonetheless, they still want that idea of being very masculine. Whether it's really true or not, that's what they try to portray. Um, and as it states here, it says plans or thinks ahead. Here's the interesting part about the power assertive type is all the other types that we've talked about will still try to conceal their identity. Whether they don't allow the victim to look at them, whether they perform these, whether they rape people at night in dark places, whatever the case is, they are still trying to conceal their identity so that they can, won't get caught, won't get in trouble. Power assertive type doesn't really care. They are thinking so much about being dominant that they actually want that person to know, yes, you're seeing the person who's raping you. You can't do anything about it. Okay. That's essentially the type the type of mentality this particular individual has. Also, force isn't used, going back to anger retaliation, where there was a lot of quick violence. Unlike that, power assertive, they only use force to gain compliance. They want you to do exactly what they desire, but it's not, their force isn't meant to cause pain, whether it be, like we talked about with anger retaliation, or we'll talk about, the aspect of that with sadistic rapist. But here was power assertive. They're simply giving or exerting enough force to have you do what they want, for your compliance, or so for their compliance, I should say. They like to physically overpower victims. Once again, not hurt, but overpower victims with their own hands. Okay. Difference. Remember the two we've talked about so far? They're okay with using weapons, different reasons, different ways, but they may use weapons. Typically, a power assertive doesn't. They may use their hands instead, just simply to gain compliance. They, let's see, let's move on to the next thing here. Tend to be, personality wise, are also loud and kind of boisterous, or very vocal. Obnoxious would be a word that most people probably use, but that's something else to look at. Also, I already mentioned, I think they like to rip clothes off. So rather than cutting clothes off like the, say, power, no, excuse me, the anger retaliation type, instead of cutting off clothes or anything like that, the power assertive, once again, hand things, wants to rip it off. Plus, they don't really care because, it's not like they have any care for the female or anything that they're wearing. It's just a part of what they're doing. So just rip those clothes off. It's not really that big of a deal to them. All right. As you can read here, I've already kind of talked about this. They want to always appear to be macho, whether they really are or not. Some other things to keep in mind. This type will typically go to singles bars, places like that. A lot of these attacks occur in the late evening, early morning time. So, like earlier, we talked about others that might be at 6. So you might be talking about 7 or 8 p.m. to like 1 or 2 in the morning. Unlike the other two groups we talked about. So remember the power reassurance. They were back closer to the 7 to 14 days. So remember that. And then when it came to the anger retaliation, it was like 6 months to a year between these. But when it comes to our power assertive rapist, we're actually looking at 20 to 25 days. So like basically about every 3 weeks, somewhere around in that time frame. Don't have a problem with multiple assaults. They will, because they want to dominate someone, they will. It's not uncommon for them to rape anally and then go into oral assaults. There's different kinds of things that they want to do as far as degrading things, but that's not uncommon for them. They will, um, since they get excited about dominating someone, they don't care about ejaculating quickly. So these attacks tend to take a little bit longer, and they have, even though they showed their face to this individual or didn't care to conceal their face, they will try not to have any further contact with this particular person. Um, it can be a brutal attack. And what we mean by, so earlier I said, yeah, they're not going to be violent. They will be violent to gain compliance. I hope I didn't say anything that would mislead you, and I apologize if I did. But so remember, going back to the anger retaliation, their violence was quick, and it was because they wanted to be violent in the process, and that's what excited them. Power assertive types, they will be brutal with what they do with their hands, and actually ripping clothes off. And if they need you to comply, that may involve actual, punching in the face, um, or other things like that. But it's not because they're getting excited about actually getting that aggression out, and that aggression is not exciting them. They are being brutal as a form of dominance. Okay, so try to think about that. Um, just think about their violence being rooted in the idea of dominating someone, not because it's getting, not for any other reason. Okay. Typically, they choose victims, which is not anything in common, but they choose victims of their own age group and of their own race, just like a lot of our others have. So, hopefully, this has helped you. Um, And one little interesting thing is that for this particular group, they tend to pick, I told you others for the some other categories, what jobs they may have, things like that. Well, these masculine occupations may be something like construction worker, even law enforcement. If you have someone uh, who would, it's not common, obviously, but that is something that it's happened before. So just be aware of that. In fact, the Golden State Killer, before he actually killed, would have been could have very likely been put in the power assertive category for rapists, um, and he was a police officer for years. So either way, that is all I have for you here, and then we will pick up with sadistic once we take a little bit of break here. I'll come back and I'll talk to you about sadistic rapists.